Watch out, it's a live mic.
This is Mark McNeese in New York City, and you're listening to another edition of the Live Mic Podcast. Welcome to the podcast. This is Mark on a dark New York City evening. Darker than it was a week ago because the clocks changed, so now when most folks are getting off at 5 o'clock, the sun is long gone. I'm sitting at my computer tonight doing another podcast, and I'm very happy to have on my guest. It's Chis MacLellan. He's affectionately known as the Bowtie Guy in many caregiving circles. Faced with his partner's diagnosis of esophageal cancer in 2011, Chris started a caregiving blog entitled The Purple Jacket, and he's an ardent advocate for caregivers and their carees, a word I'm going to ask you about when we're talking. Chris and his deceased partner, Bernard Richard Schiffer's caregiving story, In Sickness and in Health, A Couple's Final Journey, which was written by Diane Lade, photography by Carlene Jean, was published by the South Florida Sun-Sentinal in April 2014, went on to be seen worldwide by over 400,000 people, and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. It's nice to be here with you.
Very nice. We've been Facebook friends for a while.
Yes.
And I was glad to get you on the podcast. I know that you did a podcast at one point, and you're going to be doing another one, which I'll ask you about. But I wanted to start out with your book. You just published this, or it just came out. It's called What's the Deal with Caregiving, and it's about being a caregiver. Can you just tell us about the book? And I'm interested in knowing. Well, I know what the inspiration was. You lived the experience, but just about the process of getting this book out.
Well, the book is really an extension of our caregiving experience with my partner, Richard Schiffer, who passed away in March of 2014. I started blogging about caregiving, and especially being an LGBT caregiver, in 2011. And as both of us found through the blogging experience and our caregiving journey, that caregiving really had no orientation or gender boundaries. This vast network of caregivers, which is estimated out to be about 43 million in the United States. What we learned through our process is we all just kind of sit back and care for the ones that we love, and that's what was so awesome about being a part of this large network of family caregivers, both in our community and in the straight community as well.
I wish that I had had a book like this about 22 years ago. I had a partner, Jim, who died from AIDS, and I didn't reach out. I didn't seek out any resources. I was a caregiver sort of intensively for 2 years, which is how long it took him to really lose his struggle. But I didn't have any groups. I didn't reach out to anybody, and it can get very lonely.
Yeah, caregiving it can be a lonely experience, and I know for me, especially after the last 6 months of Richard's life, and then the past year leading up to this book, I found myself that I really isolated myself from family and friends, and that's a common trait in caregiving. We're so intent on caring for the one that we love, that we care for, that we kind of lose ourselves in that. We isolate. So it is a challenge to step outside your own comfort zone. But as I write in the book, there's no greater honor than to be entrusted with the care of another human being, especially at the time when life transitions.
Well, what inspired you to write about it? And it could sort of put it out there for people.
Well, a couple of things, Mark. We were fortunate enough to have this wonderful story that was written about us in the Sun-Sentinel that far reached our imagination. And as you mentioned it earlier in the bio, In Sickness and Health, A Couple's Final Journey. Nobody knew who was involved in the story that it was going to go like it did. But what I've learned from that process is that story was written about us. And I felt like I really needed to write something on my own because I had been blogging for 3 years. I had somewhat of a following on my blog. In fact, Richard, who stood a foot shorter than me, we had a little acronym for him, TLO, the little one. So I would get comments from pretty much all parts of the world of how's TLO doing. So this book is kind of an outtake from the blog and the article that was in the Sun-Sentinel. There's a little bit of memoirs in the book. There's a little bit of how-to in the book, but really it was my way of kind of giving back to all the vast number of caregivers out there. And it really has helped me in my grieving process as well. Writing has really been cathartic experience for me.
How did they find you to do the story? What was the genesis of that?
Well, that's that's a great question, Mark. Because at the time I was working for SunServe Social Services in Fort Lauderdale, which is an LGBT social service agency. In fact, it still might be the only LGBT social service agency in the country. And we were approached by Diane from the Sun-Sentinel about doing a story on same-sex couples and caregiving. And I had met Diane casually at events throughout the Fort Lauderdale community. She writes for Sun-Sentinel, and she's their aging specialist. And when she approached us about doing the story, it certainly wasn't the end product wasn't the way it was discussed in our first conversation. And that's really the genesis of how it all started. And even when we started that process, Richard's cancer had not reappeared. So that's kind of when the story shifted from just a mere caregiving story to the issues that we faced as a same-sex couple going into hospital systems and dealing with our healthcare systems and the legal systems. That's really how the story grew as his illness intensified.
Well, speaking of that, can you say a little bit about what that experience was? Did you have any opposition? Did you run into obstacles as a same-sex couple, or not?
Well, there were a few instances. Most of our healthcare providers who knew us were fine with us, and I carried what we talked about in the story, my little green folder with our healthcare proxies, power of attorney, all of our legal papers. I always had those at my side in case we encountered a healthcare provider that we were not familiar with. But when we went to the emergency room for the first time in September of 2013, the two attending physicians walked into the room and they walked right up to Richard. I'm sitting right next to Richard on the other side. They started rapid firing questions at him, and finally I just kind of spoke up and I said, excuse me, I might be able to help you with some of the issues that are going on here. And they both turned to me in unison and they said, well, who are you? And I think a lot of us, we certainly know in our community that when a male and a female walk into pretty much any type of situation, but especially a hospital situation, they're automatically assumed that they're a married couple. Mm-hmm. That's not afforded gay couples are not afforded that luxury.
Right, and I think a lot of people didn't understand and still don't understand that we have those kinds of obstacles. One of the reasons that I was so supportive of marriage equality for me wasn't really that it validated my relationships. My relationship was already valid, but I wanted those protections. I wanted to not worry every time Frank and I went to Mississippi to see my family, or we went to Indiana, we went to any of these states where suddenly our marriage was not recognized. And it was a big concern for us. It's not now. But I think it's an important thing to say.
It is important, and while we were solidified in our relationship and our love, unfortunately, even with marriage equality today, that's not going to stop somebody's personal bigotry, but those documents do help avoid some of the legal ramifications that Richard and I went through, especially at the end. But unfortunately, our society as a whole doesn't really like to talk about death and dying. But I think when you put marriage equality into the context of death and dying, you realize that in every state of the union, your next of kin is your spouse, and until you've been denied the right to be with the one that you love at the time life transitions, that's when you really recognize the unfairness of the laws as it relates to our community. And and if we played a small role in helping this change the viewpoints of society, then I know Richard would be very happy about that, and I would be too.
Now, the word carry, I didn't get to that part. Where does that come from?
Well, comes from an experience that I had with, I blog not only on my blog, thepurplejacket.com, which I still blog on today, but I joined a community of caregivers on caregiving.com, and it is a vast community of caregivers all throughout the world. And a few years, I guess it was before I joined, but I noticed that word also, carry. I didn't know where it came from. The community decided that the word care recipient just didn't seem to fit, because some people care for their parents, some people care for their spouse, some people care for their neighbor. And then with that, I cared for somebody that I loved and was a part of my life. There's many caregivers out there that are what I call caregivers by default. They're not caring for somebody that they love. They're caring for a parent that they didn't care for, or a spouse. And the community at caregiving.com just kind of came together, and they wanted to find a word that fit the person who they were caring for, and that's how this word caree was developed. And I've kind of latched on to that myself. It kind of proves the point, because you asked about it, and I'm glad that you did, because I think it reminds me that I was fortunate to care for somebody that I loved, but that's not always the case when we're in a caregiving role. And I think the word caree helps bridge the gaps.
Well, I like it a lot. Now, I want to ask you just a couple more things. I just want to read some of the chapter titles to give people an idea of what's in the book.
Okay.
They sound really excellent. Do you have a PhD in caregiving, the role of an advocate, your team of physicians, power of attorney, the pharmacist, how will caregiving change a relationship? It's disease talking. I'd really be interested in that. I'm interested in all of it, but because what it's doing is it's reminding me, I'm remembering things I have not thought of for 22 years.
Sure.
When Jim was starting to go through dementia, and it's just all these things. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to ask you, because you talk in here too about toward the end about what happens when it ends, and I think just as a lot of people are not aware that there are support groups, that there are people out there to talk to. Like I said, I really didn't have any idea. It was such an insular a world to be in when you're caring for another person, especially a lover. But when it's over, it's your identity, or my identity. I want to say you. I don't want to say you because I don't want to speak for your experience. But I've seen other people too, like my sister when my dad passed away and my mother passed away. It becomes your identity. Being a caregiver is who you are. Right. And when that person dies, the carey is gone. Mm-hmm. There's it's just this enormous sense of, what do I do now?
Well, there's two aspects to caregiving that is similar to everybody, even though our caregiving experiences are different. There's a beginning and an end to caregiving, and in most cases, we're not prepared for either one of those life events. And I thought it was important to talk about the end and what I experienced in the process, because it is something that we're all caregivers, we all go through. And you're right, the identity that Richard and I had, was so meaningful to me, and then all of a sudden he's not there, and you still have to find yourself in the midst of your grief and work through that. And I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat the reality that caregiving does end. But I think I hope I wrote sensitively enough in the book that it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to feel the way you feel, and in your time, it does get better.
Yes, and I remember a bereavement group that I went to, and the woman, I thought she was really, really helpful, but she told us that grief is not linear. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. In the rest of the world, other people may say, they've been dead for a year, isn't it time to move on? Well, that's not the truth. It comes and goes. It's not linear. And I'm just putting that out there because I found that extremely helpful, because I felt like I shouldn't be sad anymore.
Well, that is excellent. I've not thought of it in that way, but that is so true. Grief is not linear. And, we're 18 months past, since Richard has gone, and I will have a bad day. I will have a bad moment. And if it's happening while I'm driving down the road and I need to pull off and have a good cry, you know what? I just do it because I know it's going to help me. And it's okay to own your grief. And nobody can tell you that you should be over it because they're not walking in your shoes. And I had a lady tell me, who a very good friend, and she has a theory that all you need is 30 seconds of grief. And I just kind of laughed at her. I mean, I understood what she was saying, that about getting over it and moving on, but even when you look at the traditional models of grief of 3, 6, 12 months, that really doesn't apply, because everybody's grief is different. It's not linear, but we all have to be aware of it. And yes. I think that's really the key, is being aware of our grief.
Well, I definitely am going to bring this podcast to my cousin's attention. I recently saw a cousin I hadn't seen since I was 19. It's been about 30 some odd years, but her wife passed away a little over a year ago, and continues to have these days that are just sort of very difficult. But I think this would be a good book for her, and a good thing to listen to, so that she knows that she's not alone.
Well, and that's why it's so important for all of us, caregivers alike, to be able to share our stories, because if we can just touch one other person, then we know that we're doing a good thing, because it is all about sharing stories and helping others.
Well, Chris, I know you've done a lot to share your story and Richard's. can you tell people how they can find you online?
Well, the easiest way to find me is through my blog, thepurplejacket.com. And on the blog, you'll see the links to our story in Sickness and Health, A Couple's Final Journey. Also see information about my new podcast that will be coming up called Healing Ties, Creating a Life to Love After Caregiving Ends.
Well, there is a healingties.com.
And there is a healingties.com that's in the process of being redone at the moment. And I've kind of taken the last 2 months off of podcasting to focus on the edits of the book, and I'm raring to go to talk to wonderful people like you on my podcast as well.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to talking to you again. It's just been a delight, and I never know what I'm going to experience when I have a guest on, especially someone I haven't talked to before. And this has just been a great connection, and it's brought up a lot of things for me. And I think your book, I have not had a chance to read it through, but just talking to you and what I have read, I don't doubt that it's a superb book, and the testimonials are pretty amazing. So everybody, it's called What's the Deal with Caregiving, and it's Chris MacLellan, MacLellan. And Chris, thank you so much. This has just been a real treat.
Likewise, Mark, and thank you for the great work that you're doing for our LGBT seniors. It's awesome to be on with you tonight.
Thank you. That makes me feel good. Have a great night.
You too. Take care.